Welcome viewers to the program. You are in the command center at the National Television Network, NTN. I'd also like to welcome you to view the program Agriculture on the Move. I am Philip Sidney. The topic today is World Desertification Day, and today is World Desertification Day, which is the 17th of June. The theme is Food, Feed, Fiber, the links between consumption and land. Very interesting. And to discuss this topic are three gentlemen. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. And to my right,
good afternoon, Sydney. Good afternoon, viewers. My name is Jason Earnest, the Director of the Water Resources and Management Agency.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Thaddeus Constantine, Acting Agri-Enterprise Development Officer.
And good afternoon. I'm Carl Monti-Augustin. I am the Project Coordinator for the IWECO project, and I'm also a Forest Officer.
Yes, I know that. Well, gentlemen, welcome to the program and welcome to the command center. Of course, the program is a bit lengthy today because of the nature of it. And Carl, I'll start with you because you are so very tuned to that kind of program. So we're talking about world desertification. For me, I got to know of this word, not too long ago, and I was asking myself, what is this? What word is this? Of course, I got to understand what it is, but I'm sure there are lots of solutions out there who do not know. So explain.
Okay, so today is the World Desertification Day, and this is a commemorative day to celebrate the convention, the UN convention to combat desertification. So it's the UNCCD is the name of the convention, right? And it is geared towards combating or reducing desertification. Now, people ask, what is desertification, and why is it important to me as a St. Lucian? So desertification basically is the conversion of arable land into desert, or land which is productive into a land that is not productive or subproductive, right, and cannot really carry on with the normal functions that we expect as land, right? So you will find now land that goes from being arable, where it is able to conserve and hold a certain amount of water. It has a certain amount of biological life. It has a certain amount of carbon, for example, and nutrients. It is converted to a land where the water retention capacity is very low, where the level of biotic activity or life or carbon is low, and the availability of the nutrients and so on is very low. Now, this is something which is celebrated every year on the 17th of June, and this convention was launched in 1994, but came into action in 1996. St. Lucia is a signatory, and over the years you have had some notable foresters be in the focal point. So you had two former chiefs in the name of Mr. Michael Andrew Jabba, as well as David Weiss, and then Mr. Alfred Prosper being the most recent chief forest officer. There's always also the focal point for desertification. So what you could say is, over the years, the whole movement of UNCCD has brought into focus how we interact, how we manage with our land, with our soil. Because as you know, nothing can really happen without the land. The very existence of man is dependent on how he manages and interacts with the land as a resource, right? The biodiversity that we see around us, the birds, the trees, the uniqueness that makes us St. Lucia, for example, is dependent on the land, the whole landscape. So for example, if you think of St. Lucia, you cannot imagine St. Lucia without the Petors.
Right.
Right? You can't imagine St. Lucia without Pigeon Point or the Maria Islands. So all of that now is part of what makes the whole, what do you call it again? the whole, what it is to be St. Lucia, the whole structure of St. Lucia is dependent on the land.
Okay.
Now, what you find has happened is the whole movement towards desertification is geared towards creating awareness that the way we use the land will have an impact on the quality of the resource. So you find over the years, we have drawn focus into our agricultural practices. Also, the whole means of changing land uses and land management practices. So you find now we have gone from a focus on saying land is being converted to desert into now saying that, but we're focusing on sustainable land management and what they call LDN, or land degradation neutrality, where basically we're saying that it's not only about that transition to a desert, but all of that, those passes between being an arable land to becoming a desert is degrading, is degradation. So you may have degradation in different forms. You may have degradation in the lowering of soil, what do you call it again?
Carbon. Soil carbon.
Soil carbon, levels of soil carbon. Soil productivity, for example, the nutrient, the availability of the nutrients, the alteration of what you call it again, the soil leaching and so on. Now, what you find is when you eliminate and you change the level of soil biodiversity, for example, or the biodiversity you find on the surface of the soil, you now over time will have a very different substrate, a very different resource.
Okay.
Right? So we have to focus on that. And that is what UNCCD has been calling into action to say, hey, we need to transition to more sustainable practices for our food production. Okay. Sustainable practices that even if we have land that is dedicated towards housing or infrastructural development, but the manner in which that is done can actually either reduce our resilience and make us more prone to the effects of other factors like climatic factors and so on, or if we do it in the correct way, we can reduce on those impacts and
Great.
so on.
Very good. Okay, I want to go back to the theme. And Thaddeus, interesting theme: food, feed, fiber, the links between consumption and land. Can you dissect that for us?
Okay, well, land is the base for all of our productive systems. Agriculture being one of the most primitive industries that we have, has been the backbone of most of our civilizations and our growth as a people, our evolution, to put it so. Now, the effective management of land will ensure that people can feed themselves. Now, land is our source of feed because all of our resources really originate from the land. But then we also look at the feed for animals. And we need to also look at fiber, because fiber is a very important component within our manufacturing and our industrial components. So, for example, the clothing that we wear is fiber, and that fiber can come out of our plants. The feed that we give our animals, that also has a huge impact. The way we manage our pastures, the amount of animals allowed on the pasture at a specific time, how we allow the soil to rejuvenate itself, how we allow the weeds to grow. And the land being a huge carbon store, with our delving into the use of petroleum and the importance of carbon dioxide within the atmosphere, this year's theme is really timely, because we're looking at, if we don't fix the climate, we're going to have major problems down the road. But managing the land more effectively can also expedite that climate challenge that we have. Also, if we manage the land more effectively, then we can also encourage better manufacturing and better use of the resources that are available. So effective land management really, especially for a small island developing state, has a special place. And it has a place that we need to protect. We need to really protect what we have, because what we have will continue sustaining us for a long period of time if we take care of it. The climate challenges can be solved partially through effective land management. because soil is a carbon sink. And that carbon that is taken out of the atmosphere has the potential to help alleviate the situation that we're experiencing.
Great. Now, Jason, when you look at our water resource, we looked at where our water sources are coming from. Are you seeing, right now we are facing a drought, okay? Yes, the rainy season is here, and we hope to God the drought does not persist.
Yeah, we're very appreciative of the rains that have fallen so far.
So I'm asking here, what can we do to ensure that our water resource base, in terms of where we're extracting our water from, that environment is regenerated? What is in place for that to happen?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. Our water supply is primarily surface water, and this comes from the land. So basically, whatever happens on the land affects our water supply. So the water resources that flows in our rivers and streams. So like Mr. Constantine mentioned, the agricultural sector, in terms of where we get our food, our fiber. Also, in terms of the forestry, where we have our biodiversity, also it's a livelihood for some persons. All of what is happening in those sectors affect our water resources. So obviously, good sustainable land management is very important to sustain our water resources. We have seen that there has been some degradation in terms of activities that are happening upstream of abstraction points. And these are the areas that are down for targeting in terms of reducing that negative activity so that we can sustain the flows that we have so far. We also mentioned that climate change. So apart from what is happening on the land, we're also looking at the meteorological factors that also exacerbate our water resources. Now, Carl spoke about the IWECO project, and this is a very timely project, one that we want to see multiplied in many of our watersheds that are critical to our water supply, because what it does, it maintains that forest reserve that we have, because we know that we have state and private forests. The state forest is under the Water and Sewage Act is considered to be a gathering ground, and a gathering ground is where you have your primary source of water, which comes down into your watershed. So we have to protect that, but we also have to protect or prevent the degradation of the private farms that are around our forest reserve. And this is where the IWECO project is assisting that, assisting farmers in how, yes, they can continue for livelihood, but at the same time maintain that natural environment, which inevitably is reflected in water quality and water quantity.
It is a balance then?
Yeah, it is always a balance, because in development you expect certain things that would have negative consequences, but at the same time you have to try your best to kind of limit those negative activities or enhance so that it actually you don't see the negative effects on the ground. So enhancing one area, so you have negative, but then you're enhancing another area, whereas it would make up for that shortfall that you're losing in one place there. Okay. So this is very important, and like I mentioned, since it's surface, so water is a universal solvent. So whatever is happening, it's quickly going to be reflected in that water resource.
If I just want to jump on something that Jason just said. He's speaking about, but even if we agree that given our limited land space, that you would always have competing need for land, right? So what you find now is the whole UNCCD has basically transitioned to bear that in mind. The fact that we have evolved from saying, well, I'll just prevent desertification, to recognize that what they call LDN,
Yeah,
land degradation neutrality. That while you may have degradation that you can't really avoid, because you have to provide for housing, you have to provide for food production, and certain conventional food production methods would necessitate you having certain impacts on the land. But at the same time, in other areas, we can be enhancing, doing activities that are restoring and rehabilitating those impacted or degraded areas and enhancing them, so that when you balance it, you either have a neutrality being, an equilibrium being created, that boy, what you destroy is equivalent to what you enhance. But we're also hoping that what we enhance and rehabilitate would actually outweigh what is degraded, right? So what we're actually talking about those days is sustainable land management. And sustainable land management will take into consideration both the necessity of, or the needs of the biodiversity, right? So the resources themselves need a certain amount of the land, amount of space, amount of water to perpetuate the actions, as well as what the resources, what the space we need for human activities to continue. And then with COVID, what have we seen? We've seen that, boy, when we are skewed towards where man just keep degrading and going on and converting land, and more land is being changed from being under, let's say, forest protection and so on, and that is converted into production, and we are overutilizing our wildlife and all the biodiversity resources. You create this equilibrium that will cause problems. Yes. So COVID is an offshoot of that. What we're trying to push is to say, let us have that balance. So let us produce our food, our feed, our fiber in a way that it is sustainable, in a way that our grandchildren, 100 years, 200 years from now, people on St. Lucia can still have access to surface water. People on St. Lucia can still have access to the iconic biodiversity that we have, like the parrot and some of our tree species and so on, and what makes St. Lucia unique is still present.
But going back to, as you mentioned earlier, the question of land space and land use. You realize now that you have residential taking precedence, and you find people are moving away. So in other words, here's a problem, and that's where I suppose your watershed becomes, you know, there's a threat. Okay.
Yes.
How is that? Can there be a balance? Is there anything in place to ensure that we do not have too much of one factor affecting, you know, our watershed?
Well, we look at it from the point of view as to the abstraction points that WASCO has set up in the watersheds. So what we try to do is to ensure that there is not encroachment in those areas or upstream of those areas, which would definitely affect the water quality going into those catchments. So for example, you find that if there are certain areas that are earmarked for development, you know, there's an ESIA to see exactly basically what effects it would have on the ground in terms of the flora, fauna, the water resources, etc. So all of that is taken into consideration, because we know that there are certain activities that cannot be stopped per se, but in terms of it can be influenced as to exactly where those can occur. So the water resources, in terms of protection, we look at it for the water supply system, what is happening upstream of WASCO intakes. So downstream, you'll find that a number of activities happen which will not affect the water supply system, but we're very concerned about the quality of that resource as well. But it's something that where you could actually liaise and work with the different sectors to ensure that whatever negative effects are minimized. right? So this is what, from the water resources point of view, in the first instance, that it does not affect the water supply for the country.
Great, great. Okay, we'll come with you for our first break. You're watching Agriculture on the Move. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon.
What's in the food you're eating? Do you really even know? All the chemicals and hormones used to accelerate their growth. All the artificial flavoring, sweeteners and colors too. We consume and we don't spare a thought for the damage that they'll do. No, think about the children. Think about the children. How will we save them? Chemicals and GMOs are not the solution. Use organic and join.
Excessive agrochemical use, additives, and genetically modified foods are harmful to health and the environment. Join the good food revolution. Grow, buy, and consume organic. A message from Rise St. Lucia and the Ministry of Sustainable Development with funding from the GEF Small Grants Program, UNDP.
The good food revolution.
Welcome back to the program. And of course, if you're just tuning, we are discussing World Desertification Day, which is today. And our theme for today is food, feed, fiber, the links between consumption and the land. And of course, land degradation. So, Thaddeus, we know what is happening inland, upland, in the higher terrain can affect the lower terrain, of course, the rivers, the streams, and of course it affects aqualife and also the sea. Yes. So tell us a little about this.
Okay, so we in agriculture have recognized the need for protecting of the ridge to protect the reef. The ridge and the reef exist in a certain level of balance where they feed each other. So a lot of things that we need on the ridge are actually found in the reef. And a lot of things that we need on the reef are actually found on the ridge. Mm-hmm. However, misuse of the resources in any of these sites can have dramatic effects on that balance. So when we look at our land degradation and our effects, our farming practices, for example, to highlight that one is really important. And not adding organic material, for example, to the soil allows that soil to run off. And that runoff gets into our rivers. That eventually gets into the reef. And that creates a problem within our coral reefs. For us on this island, our coral reefs are really, really important. Mm-hmm. So our farmers need to be aware that every time they spray agrochemicals, they're affecting life in the reef and they're affecting the livelihood lower down stream. Also, we have desertification in the sea, because it doesn't only happen on the land. Because of some of our bad activities, unhealthy activities upstream, they can have a very dramatic and a very long-lasting effect on our fishing stocks, on our reefs, and livelihoods. So the livelihoods component is a very important component because people have to eat, people have to feed their families. But I mean, if you destroy the resource, then you lose out.
Okay, Carl, IWECO. Tell us about IWECO's the program.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm sure it hinges on what this gentleman just said a while ago. So give us a feedback. What is done to mitigate against land degradation?
Okay, well, I'll speak a bit about IWECO. I became the project. I was reassigned to the project in February of this year as project coordinator. What I will say though is IWECO is funded by UNEP, Jeff, the big Jeff. However, IWECO has, in this case, has the favor of actually dealing with or being implemented in one of the target areas identified in our land deg report, right? Or what we say that we're going to achieve in the next couple of years. The area that IWECO is actually being implemented is identified. So some of the zones that we have identified hotspots, areas of continuing land degradation, is in the Soufriere watershed. More importantly, the upper Soufriere watershed in the Fosse-Jacques Mini area. Now, IWECO is the Integrated Watershed and Ecosystem Project, where basically what we're doing is looking at enhancing that watershed, dealing with some of the sustainable land management issues, dealing with, because we recognize that a lot of times degradation is not because people are wicked and they just hate the environment, but in the pursuit of their livelihood, sometimes they will have an impact, and that impact is probably exacerbated because of the quantity of people looking for a certain type of livelihood and so on, and the format in which it happens. So the project started in 2018, and we're supposed to be in the last year, although I suspect that we'll be asking for an extension. Right? But we're looking at doing restorative activities, some land degradation restoration in terms of coming up with means of bioengineering and so on, but development of demonstration approaches to soil erosion control and so on. We're also looking at sustainable livelihood in terms of innovative livelihood, innovative businesses. We're also looking at below forest canopy activities, food production and other productive activities that can happen there. We're also targeting things like ecotourism. And then the thing about, the nice thing about our project is we are implementing, the bulk of the implementation is happening together with partners, together with stakeholders. The community is one of the major stakeholders. You have the development, the Fosse-Jacques Development Committee is one of the main project co-operatives, where they're going to be creating an agritourism park. Forestry will also give them access to some of the forest resources that we have there, for we can do sustainable tourism and so on. So we're looking at an array of activities, from water quality monitoring all the way to new innovative businesses, value added being created in that space, where we can see if we manage our land in a sustainable manner, that we can create livelihood opportunities for the people who are there currently, but for also their children and grandchildren. And that by doing value added activities, we can bring even greater opportunities, greater benefits, economic benefits to the people for doing the right thing. Right? So what you find is, even if IWECO is not a UNCCD project, but there are a lot of linkages.
Yes.
Right? Yes. So these projects, just like, for example, the Forestry Department sings Hurricane Thomas, and the Australian, the OSAID Restoration, Rehabilitation and Restoration Project, the Iron Ore Project, the Source Water Project, IWECO, and the Southeast Quadrant, Southeast Project, you find that the Forestry Department have been focusing on those sustainable land management projects with a heavy slant towards empowering rural communities, empowering rural people to get their livelihoods while transitioning to more sustainable means of managing the land. And I just want to add one more thing before somebody else probably interjects, is that UNCCD itself actually have two sets of projects. So that you find there is the Soil Life project, where they're looking at means now of increasing soil carbon content. So there's a possibility of doing some composting and other activities that can enhance soil carbon. But we recognize that soil can be a potential carbon sink. And by putting in the organics that we, in some cases, we are throwing into the ocean, or putting into a landfill, if we can transition that into bionutrients, right, back into our soil, we can enhance the soil, the physical properties of the soil. We can increase the biodiversity of that soil. We can increase the soil productivity, right? And then we can probably have now the farmers, the land managers, to transition from that chemical-based production method of the production doctrine, right, and still have viable land production. Then we're also looking at now getting communities involved in the water quality monitoring. It is your community. If there are activities that are happening which may be detrimental to the resource, the water resource, then you as a community, we would like to empower you to say, hey, we are monitoring that. We want to know what type of water we get in. Can we bathe in that? We want to be able to sell our water. We want to be able to, in a case like now where Wasco may not have water in the pipe, we want to be able to go to our rivers and be able to drink that water, be able to use that water for productive use and so on. So these projects have contributed in some way or the other into LDN, into land degradation neutrality, that while you may have new housing areas popping up because our population has grown, that we are enhancing certain zones now to be more resilient and be able to deal with the upcoming climatic shocks and so on.
Great. Thaddeus, what's the impact of land degradation on food security? Can you expand on that?
Land degradation has a huge impact. Like Carl said, we have to find some kind of balance between the use of the land and also the livelihoods that we generate from the land. Without land, we cannot feed ourselves. We have had a lot of advances in agriculture, soilless agriculture, aeroponics, hydroponics, aquaponics, a whole set of advances. However, these systems tend to be very technical and very costly to set up. When we look at feeding our populations on a large scale, the use of the land is always going to be a critical factor. And so the protection of that land will actually ensure that we can continue feeding ourselves on this planet. Some of the practices, and my whole career has been looked like I've been bashing a lot of our conventional agricultural practices. But some of these practices are very dangerous to the health of the user and also to the health of the ecosystem.
Explain that.
For example, when we take agrochemical like glyphosate, we have it in Roundup and as touchdown and also as Basta. Glyphosate has a huge residual value in the soil. And so when you spray the glyphosate, it's true you're solving a problem in the immediacy. And so in the immediacy, the farmer can feed his family. However, that problem he has created can go on for generations because firstly, it is going to destroy a lot of the microflora in the soil, the microbes that live in the soil. These microbes are responsible for ensuring that the correct balance of nutrients exists in that soil. So for example, nitrogen goes in the form of ammonia when we use feces or manure, when we use urine. So it goes in as ammonia. The plants, when they drink it in ammonia form, they get tall and scrawny and they don't produce. So the microbes are necessary to convert it into nitrates. And with nitrates, our plants become super productive. Our farmers introduce it as ammonia. They do not introduce it as nitrates. And so they need the microflora to be vibrant so that they can continue feeding themselves. However, their practices are not encouraging that microflora. And so what we've seen in the larger countries, not so much in St. Lucia, is people farm in an area and after a few years they move on to a fresh area. Firstly, they start by burning it, and after they've burned the soil, they will not add fresh organic material, and then they compound it with the use of these. So if we do not pay attention to the land, we will not be able to feed ourselves on this planet.
Wow. But the other thing is, there are other natural plants that can be used as far as biological control, right?
Yes.
To move away from those harsh chemicals.
Let me give a few so that our householders
We
can
need to know
use
that.
them.
Yes.
So for example, neem is a super plant.
Definitely.
Neem will work as a bactericide, fungicide, insecticide, nematicide. To use neem as a nematicide, you could take the neem leaves and just put it in the hole where you're going to plant your plant. It will serve its purpose. To use it as an insecticide, fungicide, bactericide, you take the neem, you boil it, or you crush it, boil it, and you let it cool, and then you add a few drops of soap. Then we have another plant that a lot of us cringed as a child, Simecotois, wormbush, Zebavay. Zebavay is another miracle herb. Zebavay is a super nematicide. And it's also very good for controlling soil-borne pests and soil-borne disease. So for a lot of our farmers that have problems with, for example, damping off in their nurseries, or they have fusarium wilt, you could use Simecotois and take the Simecotois, boil it, and let it cool, and you could add soap, just 2 drops of soap, and use that Simecotois to heal these plants. Bay leaf is a very good fungicide, and guava is a very good bactericide. Soursop leaves are very effective. Now, these plants can also serve as not only pest controls, but some of them can serve as natural fertilizers and biostimulants too. So earlier I was just explaining to a friend that you could take watergrass and blend it, or crush it with a weed eater with a mortar and pestle, and use it as a fertilizer. So you collect it early in the morning because you want to do these things when the plant is most active. Right. And that's when the plant is moving nutrients from leaf to root and back and forth. And so that is a very active time for the plant. So in the first rays of light, you take that watergrass. If you're doing tomatoes and your tomatoes are flowering, you look for a watergrass plant that's flowering. If your tomatoes are in the vegetative state, you look for one that has no flowers on it. But what the watergrass does now, when you crush it and you soak it and you spray the plant with it, it works better than that Miracle Grow that we believe in so much. Because Miracle Grow will only give you nutrients. The watergrass will give you nutrients. It will give you plant hormones. And these plant hormones will encourage good and healthy plant growth, and it will also make your plants resistant to attack. And it will give you amino acids. Their plants normally have to invest a lot of energy in producing the amino acids. And so we have the resources around us to make use of to make life better, to put it so.
Let's look at the livelihoods from the forest. And let me play, some devil's advocate. And, and we talk about fiber, okay? We can get quite a lot coming from the forest, all right? That consists in livelihoods in the various communities, all right? Hemp. I know there's a lot of talk now in the environment about hemp. And the derivatives from hemp, we know it's very, very, very high. Can we speak? I know it is not legal, but in terms moving forward, do you think, since we are talking about fiber, right, and the use of livelihoods in the communities, can that be a crop that can be looked at?
Well, I imagine that it can be a crop. I'm saying that right now we should be researching cropping systems. That we could be saying, can we be growing hemp together with bananas, for example, as in an intercropping system, where you might have multiple side cropping cycles of hemp while you're waiting the 9 months for your first banana production. But if you're looking at extracting the fiber from that hemp, probably that same factory setup could also be processing fibers from the fig body, from the after you harvest your banana, right? So the issue is there's a lot to know. There's a lot still to be learned in terms of how we set up our food production systems to encompass both the production of fiber and so on, feed because some species of hemp could also be, the seeds could also be utilized, the meal of the seeds could also be utilized as a feed and so on.
Animal feed.
Animal feed. So you may be getting multiple products from one or two of those species. And then again, now we speak about by ensuring that we have maximum level of biodiversity. Because from that biodiversity, we get in, as I say, potential medication, potential crop control for organic control for pest and disease and so on, growth enhancers and so on. So there's a lot that we could still be getting. We cannot say we're eliminating or excluding certain species when we do not know what benefits that we could actually derive from them. However, the whole idea of sustainable land management is one that incorporates the triple bottom line, the economic, the social, as well as the environment.
Yes, sir, yes.
For me, I'm very passionate about farmers making a profit when they apply the trade, because our farmers, some of them are really struggling. When we look at our livestock sector and we do a proper analysis, we realize that our farmers who are doing pigs, who are doing poultry, eggs, they're all bleeding. They all suffer. And the biggest challenge for them is the feed. Nationally, we need to change our technological packages. The tech packs must change, and the tech packs need to start including more local stuff. So, for example,
Hold that point, as I want to delve into this, right, before I continue with you for another break. You're watching Agriculture on the Move. Stay tuned. Interesting topic. We'll be back soon.
As part of government's social stabilization plan to assist persons who have lost their means of earning due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the government of St. Lucia has implemented the Income Support Program, where non-contributors to the NIC shall receive a monthly payment of $500 for the next 3 months. Taxi drivers, jet ski operators, vendors, agro processors, tour guides, hairdressers, barbers, small bar and restaurant operators, construction workers, and other sole traders who meet the criteria can apply using the Government of St. Lucia's website, www.govt.lc. Payments will be made directly via electronic transfer to the recipient's bank account. The Income Support Program, simple strides towards recovery.
Welcome back to the program. Thaddeus, you were making a point a while ago and really looking at the point we had earlier, talking about sustainable livelihoods.
Yes.
Can you continue with this?
okay, so earlier I was saying that when we look at the way we feed our animals are fed on concentrates that are produced in factories. But the base of these concentrates tends to be corn. We do not produce corn. We produce bananas. But bananas can do the same work as corn. Now, hemp is a super crop because hemp can solve a lot of our animal feed problems. As a country, for a while now at the ministry, we've been clamoring for there to be more research. And I think as a country, we need to really wake up and see that we need more research. We need to find our solutions for us. COVID has showed us that our supply chains globally are very fragile. And if we do not make our production systems more robust, change the technology to suit the island, our people are going to suffer. We are going to suffer. And so we really need to make these huge changes. Hemp, though it's still an illegal plant, hemp will lend itself to a lot of uses, from housing, clothing, animal feed, human feed,
Charcoal,
medications, charcoal, pesticides, soil amelioration, soil stabilization. So when we take hemp, separate hemp from the marijuana, hemp has more use. Everybody's clamoring about they want the legalization of marijuana. I think what our farmers should be clamoring for is keep marijuana illegal. Legalize hemp, please.
But Jason, that's interesting. So let's look at your water resource, especially now. Okay, like I said, we're getting some rain. But what are you telling our farmers now in terms of how they use the water for irrigation? What it is? What are you telling them?
Okay. Well, since the declaration of the water emergency, downstream of Wasco intakes, that water resource is available. So a number of farmers, like the larger farms, you find that they are down, on the downstream end of the watersheds. So that resource has always been available for the farmers, because I just want persons to know that when you have a river system, you have many tributaries, and Wasco's intake is probably on one or two of the tributaries or the main river itself. So you still have water flowing down to the outlet into the sea. So that fresh water is still available to farmers. Under the emergency, what we are most preoccupied with is the activities or the abstractions which are upstream of WASCO's intake, but we have not found a lot of activity upstream of those intakes in terms of abstraction. What we do have water conflicts for some smaller watersheds where persons are predominantly farmers in the downstream as well as upstream. And in such cases, you find that there is some flow, but there is not enough flow for everyone. And still, even if one farmer is able to abstract a significant portion of that flow, it may not, depend on the crop that he has, it may not be sufficient to actually for that crop to thrive. So unfortunately, we have those kinds of conditions that were playing itself out as we were going through that severe drought period. So we would encourage the farmers that are able to abstract in terms of they're using the best practices when it comes to the irrigation systems, right? So you have different methods of irrigation, but we're pushing conservation. Conserve as much as possible the resource, and also now probably they might need to have a shift as to the types of crops that are planted during these periods, because we realize that for the past few years that the consistent rains that we're getting, just want persons to know that even in the dry season, it rains, and persons can, if you're doing rainwater harvesting, you could collect significant volumes. But we realize that those have been diminishing. So that means in terms of the best practices that farmers have been implementing, maybe those might need to be enhanced, or those that have not been practicing would need to practice. So they would have to more or less liaise with the experts at the Ministry of Agriculture. I just want to go back to when we speak of land degradation. For the water resources, what it does, it affects our base flows. Because if you look at the definition for flash flooding, all our watersheds in St. Lucia fit that description, less than 6 hours from peak to peak. So it's all a peak rainfall to peak discharge. So all of that water primarily goes back to the sea, because we have a lot of steep slopes. In terms of the topography, the terrain, and the size of the country, it plays for that water to quickly go back to the sea. And in terms of infiltration, it's very limited because of the geology of the rocks and soils, and also we don't have like natural storage like lakes or ponds which feed into the groundwater system. So what you find, and what has been happening for a number of years, we depend on consistent rainfall, so to replenish what we have. So as we go in now, looking at climate change where the rainfalls are more intense, but it's less. So you find that, yes, in one given period you'd have a lot of rain, but most of that would go to the sea. And surprisingly, you find that turbidity in a number of the water supply systems around the island. As soon as it starts to rain, you have to shut it down because of turbidity. So this affected. So even when it rains, there's no water in the taps, and when it's dry, there's still no water. So overall, because of our water supply system, you find that, and because of natural conditions, we're stressed. Right, primarily because of that, because we cannot we cannot store. So one of the things, one of the activities that we're doing now is like promoting rainwater harvesting, especially on a household level, because now you find that it's been raining a bit. We're very thankful, but in terms of a household level, it would be significant for persons to capture water, but in terms of the catchment, the natural catchment, it has not reach a level where you could say, okay, well, yeah, there is adequate volumes in the current system to go back to a level where you probably cut back on the rationing and what have you.
Yeah. In fact, Thaddeus, I think that falls right into your lap when you look at water management in agriculture.
Yes.
Because we're looking at a number of factors that can be implemented. Okay.
Yes.
Years ago, we were using those big guns on overhead sprinklers, right? I mean, that's no more.
Yeah, we
okay.
don't.
So now we have to be efficient into looking at drip irrigation. Can you expound on this?
Okay. So before I delve into the question fully, I wanted to say that our farmers need to learn to share, and our farmers need to learn to cooperate. We have a few gravity lines around the island that have been giving problems. Not because there's not enough water in the line to feed every farm. There's enough water to feed every farm on the line and more. But the farmers are not cooperating.
Yes.
And the farmers are puncturing the lines, and they're closing the neighbors' lines and causing the neighbors' crops to fail. And they're fighting over it. And they're fighting over a resource that is free and that is sufficient. So that's one of the first things. Our farmers need to cooperate. Our farmers need to understand that water is a resource that is available for all. Like it says in the Bible, when it rains on the just and the unjust. It rains on all of us. So the water that is available in the soil belongs to the state. It does not belong to the farmer. It belongs to the state. And it is there for the use of all. So please stop fighting over the water farmers, please. Okay, it hurts us at the ministry to hear that these things happen. Now, on the farming level, our farmers need, Jason spoke about rainwater harvesting, and this is a powerful tool, but it has to be well done and well planned. It has to be thought out. When we look at the use of the average water tank, it costs $1.50 per gallon of storage. But on the farm level, a farmer needs to start thinking that his storage, when he's designing it and building it, it needs to be less than 5 cents per gallon. He needs to start thinking of ponds, water retention ponds to trap groundwater, to trap surface water. He needs to think of ponds that are going to trap that rainwater. There are many creative tools that can be employed to reduce the burden of water management on the farm. The farmer has to be creative, but also the farmer has to pay attention to the bottom line cost before he starts to spend. If you're a farmer and you have one greenhouse with 750 plants and you have 1,000 gallon water tank, you're not ready. You're wasting time.
True.
You only have 1 day of storage. You need 3 days of storage, and now with our interval of rain, you need to start thinking of 7 days of storage. And so the cost of water storage has to come down on the farm. Now, there are many ways of doing it. One of them is to do ponds, line them. You could line it with greenhouse plastic, which is 6 millimeter plastic, but we recommend something like 14 millimeter plastic. The 14 millimeter pond liner is not very expensive, but it will allow that farmer to reduce that cost into economically viable level. And so we need to rethink the way that we manage water on the farm, and also we need to rethink the way that we apply water to the plants. So like you were saying, we had these overhead central pivot systems. These are a thing of the past.
Yes, a cake.
They are
It's a
cake.
yeah.
Right now it's drip. I want for the householders to go research Banton buckets. So it's a hydroponic solution that was developed in Holland a few years ago. Very efficient. Very, very efficient. You get 100% efficiency out of your plant in using the Banton bucket. It keeps a reservoir of water for the plant. So if you're not there during the day, you don't have to worry about the plant is not receiving water. You come home and your tomatoes would be beautiful. Then we have an earth box system that was being employed by a group in Ancillary. That was a beautiful project. And we had some vibrant ladies leading it. That's another system that can be investigated. They are very simple systems to reduce water use and reduce water loss. One of the things we want to always ensure in agriculture is that we reduce evapotranspiration as to the lowest. So the use of mulching to cover up the soil, prevent the water loss, the use of drip irrigation, these new hydroponic systems, these new aquaponic systems, all of them are very efficient, and that technology is already here. It's not we're going to ask you to do something that we have not tried. The technology is here, it's been tested. Approach us, we will guide you.
There are also varieties that can be grown in the dry season.
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain, can you tell the farmers exactly what they can do, what plants they can use in the dry season that they can still get some form of economic return?
So when you do your every farmer should do a farming schedule, an annual farming schedule. And your annual farming schedule for a certain plot of land should have a crop rotation in it. In your crop rotation, you need to pay attention to your availability of water on your farm, but also to the availability of water within the environment. There are plants that tend to be very hardy, like sweet potatoes. So if I was a farmer, I would want sweet potatoes in my rotation because sweet potatoes will give me a little plowing. That's natural. That's a beautiful thing about that crop. It gives me a lot of fiber and brings in a lot of organic material, but it will give me drought resistance. Cassava is another super crop for our dry season. And so our farmers need to pay attention to when they plant what. Along with the plants being resistant to drought, some plants, though they need a lot of water, tend to be very sensitive to high humidity. So for example, cucumbers will come down with mildews. A lot of the cucurbits, they will come down with mildews. And so these you have to plan. So when our farmers are doing the annual planning, they should approach the extension officer. That's one of the things there. Our extension officers should assist there. And they should do that plan with climate in mind and with the water resources in mind. And also with the market. What will the market need when? So if I have a greenhouse and I can grow tomatoes year round, I will grow tomatoes when my tomatoes are have the greatest price. But if I don't have a greenhouse, then I am limited to that window when the tomatoes will do best. But these things have to be planned to reduce the burden on the farmer and to reduce the cost of production.
Okay. Carl, yes?
Yeah, what I wanted, because he was talking about, you talk about crop selection and so on. What I wanted to touch on is the whole idea of the role of having forest cover in terms of promoting infiltration of the rainfall that we do have, right? So that's one of the ways that you can actually get greater infiltration. Could have more storage of that water in the lower levels of the soil profile and so on, and that can actually be more available during the dry season. So it means that farmers themselves have to stop working against themselves. So you have a situation where it is customary for farmers to burn. And in this dry season, we have seen large expanses of land being burned. This is one of the ways we degrade the land and predispose it to becoming more desert-like. Right? But if we create and if we maintain permanent cover on our land, especially places like certain hillsides that above a certain angle or slope, as well as on our river banks, so that we can actually have less of that evapotranspiration from our rivers and so on, that in itself can help the farmers with more water being available for our consumption and for productive activities and so on and so forth. And this is where the Forestry Department, through the different projects that we've been trying to do, how can we get both? How can we have the farmer make money from his land, his or her land, while at the same time creating the most amount of permanent cover, most amount of benefits from the managing of that resource.
As we're about to end, look, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and I just want to say, based on what was discussed here, the beneficiary of all of that, those activities that are happening or implementing best land use practices is the water resource, which flows in our rivers and our stream. That's why the agency, we have multiple partner agencies, because it's not something that we can do. It's almost like we're at it's the end product. The water resource is the end product. So it depends heavily on what is happening in those sectors, the forestry sector and the agriculture sector. And those are our two biggest partners, especially here in St. Lucia, as to what is happening in our watersheds.
In fact, as we're about to close, we can see there is a symbiotic relationship, meaning toward water. We talk about food production, our food security, and of course, and our biodiversity as it continues. But as we end, 2 seconds, final words, Jason.
Well, I always say that water has value, and I want persons to remember that coming out of I would say that severe drought that we had over the last 2 months with the rains that we've been getting. I don't want it to be a case where persons just automatically forget what happened over the past previous weeks. I always say that water can be treated as treasure and trash in the same year, you know, because of when it's available, it's a free fall, and when it's not there, you never miss the water till the well went dry. But I just want persons to just continue to conserve water so that when next time we get ourselves back into a similar scenario in terms of the rationing of the water supply, there's a gap that persons would have water on their premises to fill that gap. And, you know, the impacts wouldn't be as dire as we recognize it was this year.
Quickly.
Well, to the farming community, we're here to serve. So please approach us when you're doing these farm plans, when you intend to invest that money so that it can be invested wisely and we can protect our food security. So we're here at the ministry to serve, so please approach us.
Yes, and what I would say is the forestry department, through the projects that we are implementing, like the IW Eco project, we're looking for ways in which we can have both food production, the management and maintenance of our biodiversity, and to have that resource so that our great-grandchildren can also live the way we live today.
Thank you very much.
So this is one of our main objectives.
Carl Augustine, thank you, sir, for being here. Of course, Thaddeus Constantine, thank you for being here. And of course, Jason Ernest, thank you. I think we had a very interesting discussion, and I'm hoping that solutions will come back again, you know, because there's certain areas that we need to touch. We'll come back to the hemp. You have been watching Agriculture on the Move. I would like to thank you for viewing the program. And remember, agriculture is our business, and eat fresh, St. Lucia's best. The money stays here. I'm Philip Sidney. Goodbye.